Hi guys, today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to draw and color hair. Our model for today is Zachary because Zachary has a pretty simple hairstyle. It's long, it's straight, there's not a lot going on as far as the texture goes, so this is a pretty good starting point because when we're going with hair, we're going to start with the basics, something simple, not too fancy. And the way that straight hair functions with regards to light and shadows is different than how curlier and kinkier hair textures work. So I will do more in depth on different hairstyles in the future, but if you want to see that like right now, I have some tips and tricks in my Patreon. Go ahead and pledge to that. It's the smallest tier available and you can see the tutorial right away. Alright, so the first thing we're doing is the line work. I already finished the sketch, but when we're doing the line art, you're going to want to do long swooping motions with your pen. So don't go too sketchy with it. Don't worry too much about it looking perfect. Just draw swooping lines. And a good strategy in order to get that nice long line without the breaks, without it looking wiggly, is to turn on the stabilizer tool. Now, in Paint Tool SI, it's called the stabilizer, but in MediBang Paint, which I'm using, it's called the pen correction tool. And when you're in the pens, you can click the three dots where it says more settings, and that'll turn on the stabilizer. It's a number scale. You turn it up to get more stable, turn it down to get it less stable. And it's really good for getting nice long lines without any breaks, but it's really bad for sketches. So find which number works best for you and go on from there. So the line work is going to get a little bit boring, so with the power of editing, we're going to fast forward into the future. Alright, so we're all done with the line art. I'm sure some of you guys would have liked to see that, but this video was getting really long, so we just skipped ahead to when I finished with the line work. Next thing we're going to do is the coloring. And in order to color, just take your reference photo, or if you're drawing from your brain, use your brain references. I'm drawing Zachary, so I'm using their character portrait and color picking the base color, which is the most neutral color on the character if it's a shaded portrait that you're using. Or if you have the actual references, that's even better because then you'll have like the base colors all mapped out for you. And when I do the base coloring, I just use the fill tool. A lot of people like to just color it in by hand, but here we work smarter, not harder. I don't like using it. I don't like drawing it in with the pen. I just fill in with the fill tool, and as you can see, it's been leaking out. So what I do with that is I just take the color and just fill in those little gaps, and then once they're all filled in, it won't leak out anymore. And how I fill it in and keep it in the line art, even though it's on a separate layer, is for filling in, the settings will ask you if you want to fill from the layer, which is the actual layer you're on, or the canvas. Make sure you set it to canvas and it'll use everything that's on the portrait to designate where you're filling from. There's probably something easier if you use Clip Studio, which I don't. Anyways, now we're at the shading portion, and I use the watercolor tool for this because I like how it blends with the colors. And I use two different strategies for coloring and shading with the watercolor. The first one is I just paint with it. I make the brush nice and big and just do some nice shadow strokes. And the second strategy I will use is I make the pen nice and small, and then I will draw where I want the line, where the shape of the shadow and where I want it to be mapped out at, and then I'll fill it up. And the reason I do those two is obviously painting it with it makes it a nice blended pretty shade, but when you're using the fill tool and you draw with it, since it blends the colors together, you get like a nice transitional color between the actual shadow color and the base color. So that's a really nice way to do it. And that's really all I have to say about the shadows, so I'm just going to let you guys watch me shade the rest of this picture. And alright, I'm pretty much done with the first part of shadows. The next thing I do when I'm using a much fancier coloring strategy, which this portrait is a much more fancier way of coloring for me, I'll do a second shadow color, which I'll do right underneath the first shadow color. And that just gives it more depth to it. It makes it more shaded, much more in depth, makes it look fuller. So just add a second shadow and it really gives some oomph to the picture. Now you can do just one shadow color, and that's really good for simpler and like very plain cell shaded pictures. But if you want to go the extra mile, adding multiple layers of shadow really helps with that. And alright, I'm just about done with that. So the last part of the shading process is I take the airbrush tool with a darker color and I just airbrush right at the ends, the tips of the hair, just to give it a little bit of oomph. I do it right in the roots too, just to shade that out. And it like makes it look a lot softer. So now that I'm done with that, we're gonna go on and just add some more finishing touches to the shading, just to make sure everything's filled out and working. Blend it out, blend out the shadows so they're not quite as hard, and it's basically the way to go, well, at least the way I go along with the shading process. Alright, what I'm doing now is the highlighting, and what I do with that is I take a new layer and I clip it and then I do an add layer. So I use the airbrush tool to draw in the highlights, and then I erase the tops of the highlights. I don't know why I do that, it's just something I do. And turn down that opacity because, yeah, it does give that kind of retro dodge and burn tool look, but that's not the look we're going for today. Then I go back to the original layer, and then I use the airbrush tool again just to add a little bit more highlighting, and then just going back and forth, figuring out which parts to highlight with the new layer or the bottom layer. It's really all that there is to it. And the next step to the highlighting process is I take the watercolor tool and I draw out some lines right underneath the layer just to like add an extra layer of highlighting. So the next thing I'm going to do to blend out those highlights is you see that little transparent box with the red square around it? That turns the current brush I'm using into an eraser. It keeps all the features of that specific brush, but now it erases instead of colors. So that's a pretty good feature that I like to use quite a bit because the regular brush tool, the regular eraser doesn't work for me. And at this point I realized that the add layer was way too bright, so I turned that down some before I went right back to erasing the little blobby highlights that I added. And the actual final touch I use for the highlights is I add a sparkle to it, and I use the sparkle brush that you can download from the MWDH Paint, like, I guess directory or whatever in the app. And I use two different colors for that because it grabs both the back color and the front color to give it like variation between the sparkles, which is good because it makes some sparkles less bright than other sparkles because, you know, they twinkle, so some are going to be dimmer than others. So that's a good way to get like a good sparkle effect, and I basically use the sparkle tool for like everything. And at this point I realized, man, I'm not totally satisfied with the shadow, so I just add a little bit more detail to the shading right here. Alright, at this point you could basically call it a day, but I decided to go the extra mile and I go to the line art layer. Make sure that you hit that protect alpha, which I always forget to do, and as you can see, once you hit the protect alpha, you're going to be coloring only on the lines, and that's what I'm doing. I'm just coloring the line art to make it look softer because the black lines look really harsh to me, and it doesn't really work with the style I'm going for. And black line art can work with a lot of different art styles, but for how I color hair, I usually just want a much softer color. So I'm just going to be coloring in all those lines, and you can just see it just looks so much softer. It looks so much more put together. It looks complete to me, so. And alright, we're basically done with this. It looks so much more natural. And again, we could stop right here, but I'm going to go an extra mile. I add a layer on top of the line art, and I take the pen tool, and I'm going to start drawing some hair strands in. And it's a little bit hard to see, so we're going to go ahead and do something about this, which is I take a layer underneath it, and then we realize there's a huge problem with the line art. Well, not the line art, with the whole picture. I forgot to turn on Protect Alpha when I was coloring in the highlights for the hair. So I'll see you guys once I'm done erasing all of this, and I'm all done with all those fuzzy bits. So now we're gonna go ahead and do those strands again for real this time. So I take colors straight from the hair, right on top of the line art layer on a separate layer, and just draw in strands. Make sure that whatever color you're using, you pull out from the color that the strand is. And it just makes it look a lot more beautiful, flowing, natural again to me. And it makes the picture look a lot more complete. So if you think there's an oomph that you need to add some strands to your piece. And I add strand variants. So I grab colors from the shading, the highlights, the base color, and that all like really brings the whole picture together to me. And alright, for real this time, we can finally say we're just about done finishing up coloring this whole hair. Just add in the last final pieces of strands, and it's finally finished. Doesn't that look pretty fantastic? So here is the finished picture of Zachary. I did fill in the skin and the eyes and all that, just so it wouldn't look like a floating wig. But yeah, I hope you learned something from this video. I hope you enjoyed. If there are any other hair tutorials you would like to see, please let me know. Like I said, there's a lot of different ways you can color hair. There's a lot of differences between hairstyles and hair textures that really change how the lights and the shadows fall onto the hair. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you liked the video. Share and subscribe, comment, ring the bell notification, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Love you. Bye-bye. Mwah.